recite the prayers which accompany the putting on of each vestment. Having vested, the priest takes the chalice with his left hand, extends his right hand over the burse, bows to the cross, and leaving the sacristy makes his way to the altar. Entering the church, he takes holy water and makes the sign of the cross. Having arrived at the foot of the altar, the priest stops in the middle and makes a profound bow to the cross, or if the Blessed Sacrament is in the tabernacle, he makes a genuflection on the ground, and not on the lowest step of the altar. Whereas during the rest of the Mass, the priest will genuflect on the altar steps. At the beginning and at the end of the Mass, he genuflects on the ground. He ascends to the centre of the altar. He places the chalice towards the Gospel side, takes the burse off the chalice, and takes out the corporal. With his right hand, he places the burse on the Gospel side. Using both hands, he spreads the corporal fully on the middle of the altar. The corporal should be placed roughly 1½ inches from the front edge of the altar. The reason for this is the following. During Mass, the priest will have to place his joined hands on the altar, and when he does so, he must be careful not to let his fingers touch the corporal. He then takes the chalice with his left hand by the node, laying his right hand upon the veil above the pool, and places it in the middle of the corporal, at such a distance from the front edge that the altar may be conveniently kissed. Using both hands, he opens the missal at the introit of the Mass which he is about to celebrate. He joins his hands at the breast, making sure that the right thumb goes over the left in the form of a cross. He bows to the cross, turns to his right, as he would do almost always during Mass, and descends the altar steps. The celebrant bows profoundly to the cross, or genuflects on the last step, if the Blessed Sacrament is present in the tabernacle. In this first part of the film, so as to better convey the requisite synchronization between the prayers and the gestures which are to be made, each prayer will be said with a raised voice. In the second part of the film, in which the Low Mass will be shown from start to finish, a distinction will be drawn between those prayers which are to be recited audibly and those which are to be said silently. The celebrant makes the sign of the cross with his right hand. When signing himself, the priest places his left hand extended on his chest, just below the breast.
In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Introibo ad altare Dei.
Adium crucificatur ventutem meam.
Judicame Deus edicene causa meam, de gente non sancta abomine iniquo doloso erue me.
Quia tu es Deus fortitudo mea, quare me repoesi, et quare trisit in cedo de malficit inimicus.
Emite lucem tuam, et veritatem tuam, ipsa mele luxerunt et aduxerunt in montem sanctum tum et in tabernacula tua.
Et introibo altare Dei, adium crucificatur ventutem meam.
Confitebor te vincitara Deus Deus meus, quare tristises anima mea, et quare conturbas me.
Spera in Dio conimado confitebor illi, salutare votus mei et Deus meus.
Gloria Patri et Filio et Spiritui Sancto.
Sicut erat in principio, nunc et semper, et in saecula saeculorum. Amen.
Introibo ad altare Dei.
Adium crucificatur ventutem meam.
Adiutorium nostrum in nomine Domini.
Qui feci celum et terram.
Confiteor omnipotenti, Beate Mariae Semper Virgini, Beato Michaeli Arcangelo.
The celebrant bows profoundly during the recitation of the Confiteor. He strikes his breast lightly each time he says the words mea culpa. The server having finished the prayer Misereatur Tui, the priest answers Amen and then redresses himself.
Orare promiat Dominum Deum nostrum.
Miseratur tui omnipotens Deus, et dimissis peccatis tuis pecte vitam aeternam.
Amen.
Confiteor omnipotenti, Beate Mariae Semper Virgini, Beatum Michaeli Arcangelo, Beatione Baptiste, Sanctis Apostolis Petro et Paulo omnibus sanctis et ibi pater, quia peccavinimis cogitatione verbo et opere, mea culpa, maxima culpa. Ideo precor beatam Mariam semper virginem, beatum celi archangelum, beationem Baptistam, sanctos Apostolos Petrum et Paulum, omnes sanctos et pater, orare prome ad Dominum Deum nostrum.
Miseratur vestri omnipotens Deus, et dimissis peccatis vestris paducat vos ad vitam aeternam.
Amen.
Indulgentiam, absolutionem et remissionem peccatorum nostrorum, tribat nobis omnipotens et misericors Dominus.
Amen.
Having said the prayer Indulgentiam, the celebrant bows moderately throughout the remaining prayers which are to be said at the foot of the altar.
Deus tu conversus vivificabis nos,
Et plesto et habitur in te,
ostende nobis Domine misericordiam tuam,
et salutaretum da nobis,
Domine exaudi orationem meam,
et clamor meus a te veniat,
Dominus vobiscum,
et cum spiritu tuum.
oremus.
When the celebrant says Oremus, he extends and immediately rejoins his hands. He makes sure the palms of his hands remain facing one another and that his hands do not extend beyond the level of his shoulders.
Oremus.
Having said Oremus and rejoined his hands, the celebrant ascends the altar steps as he recites silently the prayer Alpha Anubis. The recitation of this prayer ought to be finished by the time he reaches the altar. Having reached the center of the altar, he bows, places his joined hands on the edge of the altar, and begins the prayer Oramus te Domine. He places his hands palm downwards on the altar, outside of the corporal, while saying Quorum requie hic sunt, and kisses the altar. A closer look at what the celebrant does. He places his joined hands on the altar, making sure that his fingers do not touch the edge of the corporal. He places his hands palm downwards on the altar, near to the edge of the altar. Bows to kiss the altar, redresses himself, joins his hands together, and makes his way to the missal as he finishes the prayer Oramus te Domine. Let us have another look at this.
Oramus te Domine per merita sanctorum tuorum, quorum reliquie ixunt. Et omnium sanctorum ut indulgere dinieris omnium
Facing the
peccatorum.
missal,
Amen.
he begins